Welcome to the Empower LEP Podcast. I'm your host, Jana Parker. I'm a licensed educational psychologist, group practice owner, and mentor at Empower LEP. Today, I'm hosting for the second time my business coach, Mr. Scott Robson. He is just an amazing guy. And he has been, gracious enough and generous enough to do another podcast with me. And kind of the reason that we're doing this is because he is bringing his expertise to the Empower LEP community. He is going to be hosting a 3-session group coaching package workshop. He's going to be doing this in January. You can learn more about it at empowerlep.com/Coach Scott. I highly encourage you to go over there and check it out. If you use code GOALS25 for these podcast listeners, you are going to get $50 off. And you are also potentially, if you are one of the first 10 people, you are going to earn yourself a one-on-one session with Coach Scott as well. So I highly encourage you to check it out. You can also go to the Empower LEP website and look at the talk that I did recently, the 7 ways to LEP, because he gives a little mini workshop there if you're interested in just kind of seeing what he's all about. And I think that this really aligns perfectly with kind of what we all want to do at the beginning of the year, which is some kind of improvement of ourselves. While he talks about goal setting, he does it in like a non-linear kind of way, which he describes in this podcast. So anywho, I'm really excited about it, and I'm really happy to bring it all to the Empower LEP community. And as always, I hope that you enjoy this talk as much as I enjoyed having it. All right, welcome back to the Empower LEP podcast. I'm here with one of my favorite people, pretty much of all time, Mr. Scott Robson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you listened, but audience, I had Scott on a few months back when maybe you and I had just been working together a little bit. Yeah. And now it's been several more months, and the work that we have done together has just been so life-changing for me that I've said this before to this audience, but I really like to bring people to my audience who are really experts in what they do, because although I really like to think that I can support everybody with everything through Empower LEP, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert at absolutely everything, right? And I want people to have the best, So like if I find the best of what I have found so far through all of the different experiences that I have had, I want to bring it to other people. Like, why would I keep that a secret, So I'm bringing you back on the podcast. And the reason that we're doing this podcast, audience, is because we're bringing Scott to Empower LEP with a 3-session group coaching program in January. And although we did have a workshop recently that you can access actually at empowerlep.com where we talked about the 7 different ways to LEP. And that's like something people can just access for free. But you did a little mini coaching workshop for us there. And I just wanted to bring you on to just kind of talk about what this opportunity could mean for people, especially as we get into a new school year. So I'll stop there for a second, but thank you for joining me. If you have anything to say about anything I just said, please let me know.
I love it. I'm so excited to be here again. I just savor any time that we get to spend together. It's the best. I really do. Yeah, I'm so excited about working with the Empower LEP group. I think that they're such a rich, lush group of people that are so so excited and ambitious about making an impact in what they're doing. And what sort of came out of you and I talking is really that this is a really big crossroads in a lot of their lives professionally, as far as do they move forward in their careers? Do they leave behind where they are and move into something different, right? And that could look a lot of different ways.
Mhm.
And so this is really a bit of the crux of the challenges for a lot of them. They sort of, not from a knowledge-based standpoint, know exactly what they need to know, but there's something that is holding them back. There's some sort of hesitation, and that's really sort of where I specialize in. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, as you know, and I really look to work with them using something that it's called the adult developmental coaching model. And so this is really where I sort of guide you to address the complexity of your circumstances, right? And also your personal experience of it. So we're sort of de-siloing from just being a professional. We're bringing all of your life into these conversations. And it turns out we find out a lot about your relationship to risk, your relationship to overwhelm, your relationship to self-doubt. And we are able to really explore that and get into a much more healthier, healed relationship with all of these things. And then suddenly everything sort of tends to open up from there. So that's very
Mhm.
exciting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You were just making me think back to my road, like my personal journey into becoming an LEP. There was zero reason why I would not have gotten my license. Like I didn't even think twice about it. I was just like, well, I'm going to take the test and I'm going to get my license. And I did after 3 years of being a school psychologist. And so that did not stress me out at all. And I think people wonder, like, shouldn't I? But I mean, getting the license is really just going through the process and taking the test, right? It's like going through the steps and taking the test. But then a lot of people sit with the license and they don't know what to do with it. And I think for me, um, I got an opportunity to go work at a practice. So I didn't even have to uh, I didn't have to, it wasn't stressful. And I think that's another thing that people don't, they think, oh, I have to go leave or how would I do? It doesn't have to be that way, I mean, there are just, but I think we get stuck in this like fear. I mean, I can tell you I had a lot of fear when I was thinking about actually leaving the school district, but I didn't have fear about starting to use my LEP with support of other people around me. And when I went out on my own, again, like that, it wasn't just leaving the school district. First, it was, do I leave this practice and start my own? Then it was, do I leave the school district?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense, right? So like where typically we find it a little difficult to make these big changes is when that sort of transition period is going to impact in other areas of our life that are feeling really sensitive to us, right?
Mm.
So it's going to be around if we have family obligations, for example, the stability that that job brings to them financially, as well as just professionally, the relationships that we have at wherever we're at. If you're at a school district, for example, those relationships might actually be incredibly important to you.
Mhm.
Um, so much so that we have a hard time envisioning ourselves outside of them, right? I had a client once who, it was really interesting. And it's so relatable, and this is why I'm sharing this. And she and I've talked about this, where she had left a job in corporate and she had started her own practice. And for about a year after she had left, she was still calling up her old boss, asking him what he thought about things, because they had a really close relationship, which was really beautiful. But there's something else going on underneath it,
Hmm.
right? And it's like just goes to show you that like sort of unpairing our and creating this new identity of ours for ourselves, right? Because that's what's really going on underneath here. We're sort of growing our self-concept a little bit of who we are as people. That takes a little bit longer, and that can feel quite crunchy and maybe a little bit spiky, and that's tends to be where we start to get jammed up a little bit, because it is
Mhm.
a process and it's a little scary to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So so we're bringing a 3 session group coaching program to this group. And so I want to give you, I guess, a little bit of insight into potentially the different places where people might be. And then maybe you can speak to, like, give us some tangibles about how the coaching will work in a group, for the kinds of people who I'm gonna, like describe, I guess.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Yeah.
Would that be helpful to you?
That sounds super helpful. Let's do it.
Okay. So I think that based on all of the people that I've talked to, which are like, hundreds of school psychologists and people who already have their LEP, there are people who um I don't there are people who are unlicensed, but I don't think that the process about becoming licensed, I don't think is like that. I mean, that you can just get, right? So then you sit there and you have this license. And then some people are probably thinking like, well, I would like to use this, but I'm not really sure how to go about this in a business sense. And some people will probably be like, I'm not really sure how to use this in a clinical sense because it's not like they've ever worked in clinical practice before. And then we might have some people who've started to do a practice and are maybe at those beginning stages, but are feeling a little stuck in whether it's part of the business or, marketing or just kind of their own, like getting business or how they are with families, right? And just kind of those initial stages of feeling that comfort of having your own thing going on. And then there are people who are probably a little bit more into their practice, but may also feel like they're ready to kind of take a next step, or do I want to have employees, or is this working? Should I go back to a school district? I think there are people who, but what I think is probably a common thread among everybody is that schools can be a really tough place to work. And we got into this business because we wanted to help kids and families. And we want to continue to be a support for people in an accessible way, right? So when you're in schools, you can work with a really diverse population of kids and families and people who, with like a lot of diversity in every way. In private practice, that may not be the case, right? But we're also lifelong learners. I think as a whole, we enjoy and appreciate like learning new things and bringing them to the people who we're with and supporting. And I also think that we're usually the kind of people in a school district who are inspired and who are trying to bring others up, because it's not just the school psychologist who could get burned out, right? It's a lot of the people around us. And, that's like a big burden for school psychologists to have. And also, things are getting just really, really difficult in education in so many ways. And I think what the LEP kind of stands for is this, and it's not even like you have to have your LEP to do this too, but it stands for something else, just something else. And so who I'm trying to bring to the Empower LEP podcast audience are the stories of people who have these skills and have just done something a little different, whether they're using an LEP or they're a researcher or they've started something on social media or they have an online platform that they're, like just something, because we have to find ways to keep that fire alive and find purpose in the work that we do every day. So right now it's, I don't know, like close to December. And I think this episode is going to air maybe middle of December. And the school year every year, the school year starts out like strong and everybody's excited and you get your caseload and you kind of like, you make your plans. And then things just kind of start like piling on and on and on. And by the time you get to this point in the year, I think a lot of people think about like, well, what do I want to do next year? Because maybe you want to switch schools. Maybe you want to go part-time. Maybe you're totally unhappy. You want to switch districts. Maybe you're totally content where you are. But February is kind of the time that you have to make a decision about what you want to do because it's the time of year that you have to either like go, yes, I'm staying another year, or I would like something different. And so I feel like this is a really good time for everybody who's working in a school to be kind of thinking about what they want to do. And I think I probably said way more than I had plans to when I said I'm going to talk about the kind of people that you're going to speak to here. But I would love to know, based on what I just said, all of it, of course. What are your thoughts about like what you're offering us?
I love everything you just said. I think that you actually I think you did a great job of talking about the complexity of the situation that a lot of people are faced with. And it's not an easy decision. And the fact that there is a bit of a deadline that is hovering over their shoulder doesn't make it easier. But what it does do is that it sort of kicks you into like, okay, I need to make this decision in the next couple of months or it's made for me. Right. So how I work with clients and how we're going to be working within the program, which I'm really excited about, is really sort of helping to differentiate what is a problem that is solvable, whether or not that's through research, right? Whether or not that's through finding out something else, or is this sort of a deeper problem, what we call a self-doubt problem? This is something that you and I actually did a little mini workshop with this past week, right?
Mhm.
So that's going to be one of the big things that we talk about. And the reason why that's really important to separate out is because typically what happens is that we've got really like two different types of action when we have a goal that we lean into. The first is called passive action. Okay. So passive action is sort of where we learn, right? So this involves a lot of consumption. This involves reading. This involves learning from others, researching, discussing, right? And we typically, when we have a goal, we load up the goal with a lot of passive action, right? Because we feels like we're getting a lot done. But it turns out it's actually really difficult to measure if you've made any progress towards your goal, if all of your actions are passive, right? And it really also doesn't require you to be any different. That's
Can you
the
give
other
me an
thing.
example? Can you give me an example?
Yeah. So let's say I've done X amount of research on this. I've had these conversations with these people. I've
Mhm.
thought about it this much, which is really hard to measure that, right? And we all
Right.
feel like we think a lot about things, but how can we actually measure that? Um, maybe you've read a certain amount of books about it, or it's all a bit internal, right?
So
And
maybe
it's
like
all
you got your LEP license, you studied for the test, you watched a business course, you like this that kind of stuff, right?
exactly. It's
Like
when
you're
you've
preparing.
identified,
Okay.
you're preparing. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's when you've identified a knowledge or a skill gap,
Right.
typically,
Yeah.
right? And then what happens for us when we acknowledge that is that we also identify that there's a certain need for support, right? Or we need some mentoring or some coaching or some encouragement, right? And we sort of find the strength and also the knowledge into the people who have gone before you. So this makes us feel like we're a little bit more prepared, right? And sometimes that's great. That's actually great. When we're making a plan around a goal, we actually do want that, but we really only want that to take up about 30% of our actions, it turns out. The other action type is called meaningful action. Okay. And this involves creation. And
Mhm.
this should honestly take up between 70 to 80%. Right. So this is when you're actually doing something that is easy to measure, right? You have tangible evidence of before and after, right? But the thing about this, and I'll give you some examples of this, the thing about meaningful action is that this is typically where people get a bit jammed up because this is where our self-doubt comes in because we're doing something new and it requires us to be something new, to be leaning into a part of us that maybe we feel is not really fully developed. It's sort of a muscle that we haven't used a lot before, right? It feels like this is like a freaking new moment, a freaking new thing, as Brene Brown says, right? So it's this idea that it provides you though with an opportunity to evolve. So some examples of that is just sort of like preparing and facing these obstacles, right? It's sort of it's actually like doing these big moves taking a big chance on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And evolving into the sort of idea of this new you that can create and that can allow the things that you want to happen. You can allow them to actually happen, right? Um, it's also developing resilience with ambiguity,
Right.
which is the opposite of when we're learning something and we're really researching. We're actually trying to eliminate ambiguity. We're trying to make it, okay, this is super, super solid. We're armoring up with knowledge, right? So that way we can help prevent any potential risk, right? And so there's actually more risk in meaningful action as a result. And so that's why typically when we think back about around the goals that a lot of us have had, and for sure this has happened for me too, because this is just a human thing, right? Where we stop is when meaningful action comes in, when it actually requires us to be something different than we were before, acting in ways that maybe feel a little bit less safe. There's a little bit more risk, right? And so that's really what I am so curious about in my coaching, and also what this is really going to explore, because typically for a lot of people, this is what this step is going to take, right? Great, let's figure out what this sort of passive action is going to be. What are the learning problems that you have, right? What can you Google to figure out? Cool. Turns out though, that's not where we're really stopped, because we typically know what we don't know,
Mhm.
like what we need to find out. So this really focuses on how can we start creating some real sense of resilience in our inner resources, so that way we can start creating a little bit of bigger moves and heal our relationship to self-doubt, heal our relationship to these risks, and actually include more of these risks in what we're doing rather than avoiding them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you get all of that in such a short amount of time? I mean, it's like 3 sessions. So, like, we're starting, but I think you've done this before, right? Like, this
Yeah.
is like something that this isn't new for you. It's just new for us. So, like, kind of talk me through how, if somebody wants to do these 3 group coaching sessions, what can they expect?
So what they can expect is, so in week one, we're going to be we're going to be reviewing a few different concepts. The first one is this idea of an inner protector, right? So we all have this relationship with risk. You're nodding your head because you know
Mhm.
exactly where I'm going with this. I love it. So we all have a relationship with risk, right? But we also have this part of us that's always trying to protect us from risk, right? From a perceived psychological risk. But there are some risks that for all of us feel way like just heightened, more heightened than other risks, right? Think about your life. Some people are like, I don't mind having a hard conversation. I can be really straightforward. That's fine for me. Whereas other people, they would rather a trapdoor open up underneath them every time they have to have a hard conversation. It's like the worst idea ever, right?
Right.
And so it's this idea that we each have these different relationships to this. And so the conceptually, it's this idea that we've got this inner protector that is keeping us away from these perceived psychological risks that often have to do with our biography, what was modeled for us, right? Different circumstances that have happened to our life. Also, the current context of what we're dealing with, how we're feeling overall at that moment. All of these things can go into really influencing how risky something feels. And so when something feels risky, that means that we also feel under-resourced internally. And so what happens? We create a belief around that, right? That belief is, I'm not somebody who's that great with conflict. If I have this really difficult conversation with my friend or with my colleague, everything's going to fall apart. I'm going to lose the relationship, right? So the first thing that we're really working on in this in the program is really about meeting this protector, starting to understand a little bit, because it turns out this protector is oftentimes the one driving a lot of our behaviors when we're in an avoidance pattern, right? So we're doing this from a compassionate standpoint. We're not looking to like defeat the protector. We're not looking to like have a knockout, drag out fight with it, which I think a lot of other models tend to do. I
Mm.
personally don't think that's very effective. But that's how we're sort of approaching that. We also are going to go over something I call the 6 Ps of resistance. So these are all the ways that we resist things, right? So if you've ever procrastinated or on something that feels a little dicey,
Uh-huh.
which I'm sure you never have, but I certainly
Never, ever.
That's one of the 6 Ps that we're really, really, in a very tight relationship with most of us, right? And there's also the 7 psychological risks. So these tend to be the risks that for us are the big ones that we tend to avoid, depending on the circumstances and the context in our biographies and what I was all those things that I was talking about.
Yeah.
So that's just week 1. Okay. So a lot of this is just like, I want you guys to know this stuff just so you can know it. Because once you know it, you sort of can't unknow it, right? It's just a different way of looking at things than maybe you've heard before. Week 2 is then we're going to be really going into those protective beliefs I was talking about. Like, what are the actual beliefs in this case around this goal that you have? We're going to really focus on that. And like, what is that belief that might be holding you back from that perceived psychological risk? So there's a process that I'll take you through that will actually uncover that. We'll look to loosen your self-doubt around that a little bit, and then really go over what are those inner resources? What do they actually look like? And then in the 3rd week, we're going to be creating something called a courage-based plan. Okay. And the courage-based plan, that's sort of like what I feel like everything is like building up to. So this is really like the sandbox for us to be able to stretch and expand that self-concept a little bit of how much risk we think we can take, but it's done in a way that's really gentle, that is also completely nonlinear. And I think that's actually really important to having a plan for a goal that is actually going to get us where we want to go. I think most plans are linear and they don't really work, it turns out.
What do you mean by nonlinear plan
Meaning that
or nonlinear goal?
yeah. When we think about goals, I think most goals, when we think about them, are timeline based, right? I do this and then I do this and I do this, and they're usually very, very linear and they build on each other and it makes logical sense. I get it. The problem, though, is that they tend to fail because they actually don't really reflect like the messy human reality that we're all living in. And as a result, they actually aggravate our self-doubt even more. Because the moment that we don't do one of those things on that plan, oh, like forget it. Oh boy. The whole thing's out the window, right? It's like, turns out I'm not someone that can do this plan, right? Then we have another belief that comes in and just adds to it. And then it's just aggravating that self-doubt and the whole thing falls apart. And this is why resolutions also don't work, by the way. So another reason why these plans tend to fail is that they're generally developed before you've even taken any action, right? So it sounds really doable until you actually come to do it. And then you're like, oh, it turns out this is really hard. I'm coming up against all sorts of internal resistance here, right? Like I have to do things that I'm really, really not comfortable with, or maybe I just haven't really thought out all the steps that I do need to take. And it just feels like too big of a chunk. And I don't even know when to start chipping away at that, right? One of the biggest reasons why I feel like they don't work too is that I think linear plans sort of assume that you're going to feel like doing a task because it's on the plan. And we all know that is absolutely not true, right? Because there are days when you're just feeling uncertain. There are days that you're feeling lonely. You've got a tummy ache. You're just feeling down. You just don't have it in you, right? And also ignore sort of like the external circumstances that naturally come up, right? So yeah, life just unfolds like this labyrinth, right? And we want to make sure that our plan actually reflects that. And we want to also encourage us to include not only all those other days that I was talking about, also those days that you're feeling like really like you're there to kick butt and you have a lot of courage those days, right? And you're like those brilliant days that you're like, oh my God, I just woke up and I know exactly how to do this, right? The linear plan actually doesn't account for that because you might have to evolve the plan, right? So that's why I think nonlinear planning is actually really, really important, right? It helps us to avoid that sort of double whammy of not only failing, but then blaming this on our inability to carry out tasks that activate our self-doubt.
Okay, so you're going to teach how to do this.
Yeah.
Have I done a courage-based plan?
You haven't done one yet.
Yeah, I'm like, this sounds interesting.
Yeah,
Fun one.
it's great. It's really, really great. And it's flexible, and it allows you to show up exactly as you are on that day. And there's room for you, right?
Is
Go
okay.
ahead. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was just about to say that, like, there's no version of you that's unacceptable
Hmm.
in a nonlinear plan. And I think a linear plan actually encourages us to think that there's parts of us that are unacceptable.
Hmm. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, it's just making me think of I had, when you get like a glimpse of something that it reminds you of, but then I lost it. Um, it was like something I learned about like being when you go into a class, like if every teacher was just like thought that about every kid, like
Yeah.
that there's no part of
Yeah.
you that's unacceptable.
Yes. Completely. Completely. Right. That's how I think of my clients. I just hold them in that, like, positive regard,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Okay, so question. We have a pretty wide audience here, and I would say that like the majority are probably school psychologists or licensed educational or just some kind of psychologist or a like-minded professional. That's who probably the majority of this audience is.
Yeah.
Mm, I guess I want everybody to feel, and this is I guess the question for you, like, is there's not like a you need to be in this stage of whatever. Like I don't even care. I don't even think it matters if you are never going to get your LEP. Like this isn't really about that. This is really about just like support for the audience and wherever they
Yes.
are, right?
Wherever they are. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, one of the ways that um this is going to meet people wherever they are is really in how we frame these goals. So number one, of course, you're going to learn all of these concepts, which you're bringing into your entire life. You're bringing into your personal life. You're bringing maybe even into how you think about some of these concepts as you're dealing with clients. Um, but the other thing is that as far as the goals that you set, one of the things that I think is really important to remember here is that we're really not working with binary goals here either, right? So when we're working with binary sort of pass fail goals, right? So that's like, I want to make a certain amount of money. I want to lose a certain amount of weight. I want to have a certain number of clients. We when we're sort of tempted by that, and this is where, by the way, the land of New Year's resolutions live,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, we want to gently steer or sort of nudge ourselves into a different direction, something that is a little bit more broader, right? So the whole point of really the goal here is to expand your self-concept and see who you can become in creating this goal, right? So it doesn't matter where you are in your process, right? Maybe you're like, I think I'm going to stay as a school psych probably for another year. I'm not quite there yet, right? Totally fine. What do you want that year to look like for you?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to be practicing over the next year for yourself, right? What's underneath that goal of staying there for one more year?
Well, it might even be for my whole career. I'm going to stay here for my whole career, yet who do I want to show up as?
Yes.
Am I
Yeah.
happy in this? Or like, how can I reframe some of my thinking to enjoy or appreciate what I'm doing more than I do now? Or,
Yes.
what's another way that I can grow in this role that I have that is not going anywhere?
Completely. 100%, right? Like, what's going to be expressed by, in this new goal of like, I've decided I'm going to plant roots for sure here. Like, this is what my future is. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
Great. Let's create a vision around that. What do you want that to look like?
Yeah. And you made me start thinking about, like I've had several business coaches and, um, and everybody has done something great for me, but a lot like people were like about the logistics, right? Um, and that's kind of what I provide, right? Some logistics, business, clinical practice, report writing, kind of like the nuts and bolts of thinking about creating a business. But at a certain point for myself, and I actually wish that I don't know, like, I'm glad you showed up in my life when you did, yet I could have used you sooner. Like, but because, but what, I was told, like, I was told by a tax attorney, like, oh, you need to get a business coach, and your business coach is going to help you figure out what you need to do with your business. And I interviewed a few business coaches, and I just didn't, I felt like it was a lot of the logistics with them too, like kind
Mhm.
of like, okay, well, you need to get a business plan and like all these things. And I was like, well, I don't know, like, I don't know. I needed something different. And I think what I've gotten from you is what I needed, which was just like, how do I step into this different kind of role as a leader, as an entrepreneur? Like, how do I step into that at like internally, not the logistics? I have my to-do list, but more like the confidence and the conflict resolution, and how to show up differently because now I am the boss, rather than like I have a boss. It's different, it's like no one
Yeah.
teaches you how to do that.
No one. No, it's so funny. We get these certifications, but what don't come with the certifications is really how do we navigate actually using our certifications? That's the irony of it, right? So we're sort of left on the side of the road and like the bus is pulling away and we're like, but what now? Right. And so it's such a normal thing. And this happens, by the way, in any field, in any industry where there's some certification you get. And then you're expected either to start your own solo practice or work in a group practice or agency or anything along those lines. um, it could be really overwhelming and a lot of your stuff can come up, right? And so then we make ourselves feel bad that we have our stuff coming up. But doesn't that make sense? We're not supposed to know how to do this quite yet, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we sometimes choose to work with somebody and we work through those things and then it all makes sense and there's no problem actually. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, it turns out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all like a work in progress.
Yeah, we all are, right?
Right.
We're all, including me, I'm a work in progress
Yep.
as much as anybody else. Yes.
Well, so is there anything else, just as we're wrapping up here, that you feel like people should know about the workshop itself? And then I'll just kind of get into a couple of details about how people access this. But like, you know, I feel like this is the perfect time of year for people to be thinking like, it's the time of like New Year's resolutions, which you said don't work, right? So like
Yeah.
this kind of offers an alternative.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does. One of the things I was thinking about is that there's probably like, if you just want to have a different voice in your head around this thing that is the certification, this might be a really great opportunity for you, right? And I was thinking about this before we came on today, like what might some of those voices sound like? And they're generally going to be in my world, how I think about this is either over functioning or under functioning, right? So the under functioning is going to say maybe it's not the right time. I don't know enough. I need to do more research before I can take more action, right? Or it might be this is really, really hard. I can't possibly do this. I can't decide. I don't know what this is going to look like for myself, right? And so that's generally what that might sound like. So if that resonates with you, that makes sense, right? The other ones, the sort of over-functioning ones, that, well, I've got so many other things that I'm doing right now. I've got so many obligations, right? I have so many other people that require my attention. I don't have time to do this, right? Or maybe it's just that sort of like that inner critic voice, which I think is the one that our society talks about the most, which is just like, we can't do enough to be in the right place. It can't be perfect enough, right?
Mm.
It can't be exactly the way I need it to be. But I'm going to keep working until I can get there. right? So if that's resonating with you, might be a good time to just talk about it. See if we can just think about this internally in a different way. It might move something, it might shift something, it might open something up and provide you with a couple of new opportunities to think about it
Yeah.
that might tip you in a direction that actually feels really aligned and
Mm,
feels like the version of yourself that feels like your oldest, wisest, healthiest self, actually.
sounds nice.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're starting this in January. There are 3 sessions in January. I think the listeners should know that you can learn more at empowerlep.com/Coach Scott. Um, I think, like you said, this is an opportunity for people to really, like, wherever they're at in their LEP journey, in their school psych journey, in their personal journey, in their family journey. I think the nice thing is this group of people that you end up with are all going to, I think it will be just kind of a naturally safe environment because everyone is going to be like minded, kind of coming from the same circle sphere, right, of work. So even if people are working on very different things within themselves, I feel like there's going to be just kind of like a natural safety in that. I have had with the mentorship groups that I run for Empower LEP, like it's amazing because we're just, it's like just such great conversations because we're all kind of thinking about the same stuff and, have come from like similar um, career backgrounds and stuff. So it's cool to have a group like this. Um, I also wanted to just mention that there is a special offer to get $50 off with a code GOALS25. I thought that would be a cool thing to do. So for the listeners, $50 off of coaching with GOALS25 for these podcast listeners. And I don't know, like maybe should we give a little, should we give a little promo for the first couple of people who use that
Yeah,
code? What should we do?
totally. Totally. We have, you and I have something that's really exciting, which is that the first 10 people who sign up for this actually gets a free session with yours truly.
Oh, well,
So let's not forget that. So we already have some takers. There's not as many left, but if you guys can jump on this, then that would be something that would be available for you. I'm so happy to extend that to the first 10 people that sign up for the program.
well, let me just tell everybody that a one-on-one coaching session with Scott is like worth the whole thing. It's worth the whole thing. It really is. Okay. So, well, I don't know. I'm hopeful that this resonates with people. Like I said, I like to bring to this audience the kind of people that resonate with me. And, I don't know. I think I always like to share. I've always been like one of those kinds of people, like a connector, you know, like I
Yeah,
want
you are a
everybody
connector.
to know the people that I know, like who have been amazing in my life. So yeah, I'm really excited actually for everybody who gets to do this. And I think it's basically an investment in yourself and kind of, I think would give you more than that new gym membership for the beginning of the year might, right?
I think it might. It might. You might still end up at the gym, but you'll feel a lot different about it. Let me tell you.
Right, exactly. Well, I have been so grateful to have yet another hour with my amazing business coach, Scott Robson. And thank you for supporting this Empower LEP community and being available to us and making this offer. Yeah, everybody, I guess we'll see you next time. And I hope that you get to enjoy Scott as well.
Thanks so much, Jana.
This episode of the Empower LEP podcast is brought to you by one of my newest trainings on the Empower LEP platform, How to Network and Grow Your Business. This was one of my favorite trainings to record because it's one of my favorite things to do. And while this may not be one of everyone's favorite things to do, networking is absolutely essential for growing your practice. So we are going to talk about all things networking in this course. It is self-paced. You can get it on empowerlep.com. Thank you for listening to the Empower LEP podcast. Episodes can be found at empowerlep.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to connect. I would love to learn more. I can be found at Jana at empowerlep.com.